The Tennessee Titans miss out on Chase Young, so they must turn their attention to offensive tackle. I'll explain why on today's edition of the Locked On Titans podcast. Let's get it.
You are Locked On Titans, your daily Tennessee Titans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to the Locked On Titans podcast. I am your host, Tyler Rowland. Titans fans, today's edition of the Locked On Titans podcast is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKED ON for $20 off your first purchase. The Tennessee Titans do miss out on Chase Young, but they had another free agent visit on Monday with Andrus Peat, the offensive lineman formerly from the New Orleans Saints, and I think that's exactly where their focus needs to be. We'll talk about that, plus why the path to Joe Alt is clear, and could Marvin Harrison Jr. really drop to number 7? We're going to discuss all of that before we get into it. Thank you for making the Locked On Titans podcast your first listen each and every day. Remember, Monday through Friday, Tennessee Titans content all year round, always for free. Make sure that you get subscribed, stay subscribed. It's your team every day here on the Locked On Titans podcast. Make sure that you throw a thumbs up on the video. Show's always free. All I ask for in return is the press of a button. And make sure you guys go check out my Calvin Ridley film breakdown on the Tic Tac Titans YouTube channel. Excited for you guys to see that. But with all that being said, it is time to dive in here again. Chase Young will sign with the New Orleans Saints. He moved his visits back a little bit, went and saw his first visit, which was the Saints on Monday, and has decided to sign with them 1 year, $13 million, fully guaranteed. At that price, I got to tell you, I don't think that it's insane that the Tennessee Titans decided to pass, if they probably didn't get the opportunity to pass, whatever. At $13 million fully guaranteed for 1 year with what the risks are with Chase, I'm okay with the Titans, missing out on that opportunity, I guess, let's say, because the Titans have turned their attention where it needs to be, and that is at offensive tackle, where they had a visit on Monday with veteran offensive lineman Andrus Peat. He has been with the Saints throughout his entire career. He's played a ton on the left side of the offensive line. He's played 2,000 snaps in his career, over 2,000 snaps at left tackle, over 4,000 snaps at left guard. He's had 6,152 snaps total. So basically his entire career, he's been on the left side of the offensive line. And ultimately, if the Titans want to get use out of Andrus Peat, if they decide to sign him, again, it's just a visit, but if they decide to sign him, it's definitely going to be somebody who they should count on to have on the left side of the offensive line. Peat is 6'7", 320 pounds, 30 years old, though. He's a guy who has had ups and downs throughout his career. He was an athletic guy coming out of college, had an 8.54 RAS score, a relative athletic score, just a combination of all the combine stuff with measurements and testing, all of that. So an athletic guy with really long arms, over 34-inch arms. He's got strong hands. He's got good length, good height, of course. A decent athlete. Doesn't move his feet incredibly well, but he can get around a little bit. The thing is, like I mentioned, he is only really going to help you on the left side. I know that Bill Callahan has had success in the past moving guys from one side of the offensive line to the other. But at this point, Peat is 30 years old. He's played, again, 6,000 snaps in his NFL career, basically all of them on the left side of the offensive line. I think it would be risky to expect top production from Andrus Peat, his top level of production, not even top in the NFL, just the best version of Peat. I don't know if you get that if you put him on the right side of the offensive line. He's also a guy who struggled with penalties throughout his career. He's allowed 3, 4, 5 sacks a season, basically his entire career. Again, he also is 30 years old. So it's not like a young player who you're hoping to get some potential out of, like maybe you would get with a Josh Jones. And he's best on the left side and only the left side. So to me, if you sign Peat, I don't know that that is your answer at right tackle, but what I think it gives you is insurance going into the NFL draft. I'm calling Andrus Peat Joe Alt insurance. That's what he is to me, because I think the Titans still need to look for a right tackle. And if they don't think they need to look for one, it's because they think Nicholas Petit-Ferrer, Jalen Duncan, Dylan Radins could be a right tackle. Maybe even Sadiq Charles, I guess, could be an option there. I think the Titans would be playing with fire by doing that, but maybe you only solve one tackle position. Maybe you want to take a wide receiver early in the draft, and then you want to get a right tackle later in the draft. I don't think they should do it, but maybe the Titans want to trade down a couple of picks, pick up Fatanu, pick up Fuaga, pick up Mims, pick up Latham, guys that have had more experience at right tackle and maybe are better served at right tackle. Maybe that's their plan. And then they can have Pete play left tackle for this year and address that down the line, or maybe take a development guy later in the draft who can play left tackle down the road. So I think there are a ton of options. Either way, if the Titans don't get Joe Alt at pick number 7, they can go to Andrus Peat, who, again, played mostly left guard in his career, but played pretty well at left tackle for the Saints at times last year in 2023, and played left tackle early on in his career. So I think the Titans should be focusing on left tackle. They should be focusing on offensive tackle, especially now with Chase Young out of the picture. If you're not going to get a high-level, high-upside guy on defense, then you need to solidify this offensive line with more veterans and guys who can potentially play tackle if you miss out on guys early in the draft, again, like Joe Alt. But here's what I do want to say. If the Titans do sign Andrus Peat, which they haven't yet, but they probably will, I think it would make sense. You can't let that stop you from drafting Joe Alt, okay? Because either way, if Pete has to be a starter, okay, then he's a starter. But at minimum, he can be somebody who pushes Joe Alt on the left side. Like, hey, we're not just going to hand it to you, rookie. You're going to have to fight for it a little bit. I like having a guy, and let's be honest, more than that, I mean, if Joe Alt is drafted number 7, he should be expected to be the starting left tackle. But injuries happen. We know that as Tennessee Titans fans. So having as much depth on the offensive line as possible cannot be a bad idea. So whether Skoronski gets injured or Alt gets injured, 2 young players, you have a guy in Pete who can play left guard, who can play left tackle. Again, this is why offensive tackle needs to be their focus, because like we talked about on yesterday's show, and my everydayers will remember, finding out what you have in Will Levis this year is the most important thing. I do not expect the Titans to win a Super Bowl this year. So finding out what you have in Levis is ultimately the most important thing, and you got to shore up the offensive line. And I feel uncertain about things right now, especially if you go in with a starting left tackle and right tackle that are both rookies. So having a guy like Pete is a little bit of insurance, and then maybe developing one of the guys that's already on the roster who you can maybe play at some right tackle too. That'll be very important for the Titans going forward, and probably an X factor for their season. But the Titans are also still set to have a visit with Marcus May, the safety. Titans really need safety help. I mean, if they don't get Marcus May, Justin Simmons is still out there. Jamal Adams, I guess, he's not really a coverage guy, so I think you would need Kayvon Wallace to be paired with him if you have the opportunity. At offensive tackle, Mekhi Becton's still out there. Charles Leno, I guess, if you want to go real old on the left side. Josh Jones. Now you have George Fant off the market. Missed that over the weekend, but Fant goes to the Seattle Seahawks, so that's not an option. Trent Brown still out there. Again, a lot of this stuff is fluid. It's free agency. By the time you hear this, certain times, certain guys could be gone. So the Titans need to focus on offensive tackle. And with Chase Young gone at edge, maybe a reunion with Clowney, who played well with the Ravens last year. Kyle Van Noy, who's older but played well with the Ravens last year, who Denard Wilson knows. I mean, options are slim. So the Titans really need to focus on offensive tackle where there are still options. But I still think Joe Alt will be available for the Titans, and the path got clearer over the weekend. So I'll explain how the Titans got a better shot at Joe Alt based on other NFL moves before I get into it. Do want to let you guys know that today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time is the best place to buy tickets. It doesn't matter whether it's sports, music, comedy, theater. I mean, I bought tickets on Game Time for comedy shows, for baseball, football, basketball events, a concert as well. I mean, I've done it all on Game Time, and it really takes the guesswork out of buying tickets because you have great features on Game Time. Number one, you got all-in prices. So you don't have to worry about how much is going to be added onto your ticket. You know what your ticket costs when you go to check out. You also get a view from your seat, so you literally know what you're going to be looking at when you sit down in your seat. When you buy on Game Time, also, they have a ton of last-minute deals like zone deals and flash deals. And if that's not good enough, you got the Game Time guarantee. If you find tickets in the same section and row for less, Game Time is going to credit you 110% of the difference. So again, take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, use the code LOCKEDON. That's LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Titans fans, let's continue today's edition of the Locked On Titans podcast. We talked about why the Titans need to focus on offensive tackle in free agency going forward and what happened with Chase Young and then the new visit with Andrus Peat. Now I want to move forward and talk about how the Titans' path to Joe Alt at number 7 got a lot clearer over the weekend. Excited to dive into that. And we'll talk about Marvin Harrison Jr., who, according to recent draft buzz, may not be wide receiver 1. We'll talk about that at the end of the show. Do want to let you guys know that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. It's called Locked On Sports Today. And baseball fans, you have to mark your calendars for March 20th at 7 p.m. Eastern time for the best MLB season preview coming exclusively to Locked On Sports Today. Again, it's on March 20th at 7 p.m. Eastern time. Be the first to get local insight from the MLB local experts of Locked On Podcast Network. Find it on March 20th at 7 p.m. Eastern time on Locked On Sports Today, 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube or on the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. So let's just go pick by pick here and talk about how the Titans' path to Joe Alt got even clearer. Because we talked about Andrus Peat being Joe Alt insurance. But the Titans still need to focus on getting Joe Alt. Again, I do not believe that Marvin Harrison Jr. will realistically be available for the Titans. I just have a hard time believing that, even with all the recent buzz that we're going to talk about. But I think Joe Alt is still the best realistic option for the Titans, and the path got even clearer. Number 1, the Chicago Bears. They traded Justin Fields. They're taking a quarterback. I mean, everybody knew that, if you're honest. But I guess not, because there was a lot of Bears fans and YouTube comments and on Twitter who were just acting like there was no way the Bears were trading Justin Fields. And it's like, it was so obvious. So if you're somebody who thought that the Bears weren't trading Justin Fields and we're going to not pick Caleb Williams, just use this as a learning experience. Washington, I mean, they signed Marcus Mariota as their backup. That's not a serious option. They traded Sam Howell. That's not a serious option. I don't care what anybody tells you. I don't care what anybody says. It's going to go Caleb Williams, Drake May, 1-2. There's no way I believe anything else. And if not Drake May, if I'm wrong about that, it's at least going to be Jaden Daniels. There's no way Washington passes on a quarterback there. New England, there it does get interesting. New England could consider taking a position player other than quarterback. But they signed Jacoby Brissett, and that's not a long-term answer. And I think that taking Jaden Daniels at number 3 and letting him sit behind Jacoby Brissett for a year is exactly what the Patriots need to do as they build their roster, because I think it would be dangerous to put any rookie quarterback behind that roster. So to me, it's going QB, QB, QB. And whether it's J.J. McCarthy in there instead of one of the, I don't care. It's going QB, QB, QB. And we see with the Bears, the Commanders, and the Patriots, they have made moves to signify that they're taking a quarterback. All right, so that makes me feel good there. Then Arizona. Look at what Arizona has done. They went out and they signed Jonah Williams. And every reporter who reported the Jonah Williams deal said the Cardinals are signing Jonah Williams, who they plan to play at right tackle, as they move Paris Johnson full-time to left tackle. So if they have a full-time left tackle who they drafted number 6 in the draft last year, they traded back up to draft number 6 in the draft last year at left tackle in Paris Johnson. And you just gave the biggest offensive tackle deal and guaranteed money to Jonah Williams to play right tackle. Jonah Williams is not going to play guard. So Why would they take Joe Alt? Why would they do that? Why would they do that? They wouldn't. So the first three teams, if New England doesn't take quarterback, they're going to take a wide receiver, right? So the first four teams, three quarterbacks or wide receiver at three. Arizona not taking offensive tackle after doing that. Not worried about that there. And if Minnesota jumps up, they just traded for number 23 with the Texans. So they have 11 and 23 and no quarterback at all. So Minnesota might jump up in the top four and the top five. And then it just increases the likelihood that Joe Alt isn't drafted there because they're obviously going to want a quarterback. And then you get to the Chargers. And that's where the real worry kicks in. And when we talk about Marvin Harrison Jr. in a second, that's where the whole theory hinges on. We'll talk about the Chargers. But they just cut Mike Williams and traded Keenan Allen. Quentin Johnston could get better, could improve, but he looked like a bust last year. You can't count on him to be your true number one wide receiver. There's nothing about what he did in his rookie year to make you think that. So, based on what we saw with cutting Mike Williams and trading Keenan Allen, the Chargers have to take a wide receiver, right? Especially with having Marvin Harrison Jr. maybe available if four quarterbacks go. With having Malik Nabers available, Rome Odunze, they have their pick of the wide receivers potentially. Brock Bowers even, as someone who can catch the football, somebody. I mean, I know that the Chargers could still take Joe Alt. That's the biggest worry. But, I mean, with what they've done, how could you not think that they're taking wide receiver? That has to be the prevailing thought at minimum. So the chances of the Chargers passing on Joe Alt went up over the weekend with the moves that they've made. So that's great news. And then you get to the Giants, who have Andrew Thomas at left tackle, who's a good left tackle. They're not drafted Joe Alt over Andrew Thomas, who they took in the top 5 of the draft a couple years ago. He's been really good. And then they went out and signed Jermaine Illuminor, a guy who we thought could be a candidate for the Titans' right tackle spot. So you have the Cardinals and the Giants both going out and signing right tackles. And then you have the Chargers cut Mike Williams and trade Keenan Allen. You have Minnesota trade for number 23 to prepare for a big move up the board to take another quarterback in the top 5 or 6. You have New England and Washington not getting any kind of long-term option at quarterback. And then the Bears traded Justin Fields. Arizona signs a right. I mean, all of this lines up perfectly for the Titans to draft Joe Alt. And you get Joe Alt at 7, but you have Peat behind him as a veteran backup who can also play left guard if Skoronski were to get injured or if Alt gets injured. It's just the Titans need to have a much better offensive line this year. So I know right now we're all in the mode of worrying about starting lineups, but if you think about Andrus Peat as your swing tackle, as your number 5 or 6 offensive lineman behind a guy like Joe Alt, that's great. And if something crazy happens and the Titans can't get their hands on Joe Alt at number 7, well, now at least you have somebody with starting experience, 2,000 snaps at left tackle, who played pretty solid last year, who can stem the tide, and then you draft a right tackle in the second round or after a trade back in the first round, and you at least have a young tackle on the offensive line who you're building around, and then you have a veteran at the other spot, which if you think about it, I want Joe Alt at left tackle and a veteran at right tackle. That's the same thing anyways. And then ultimately, again, the Bill Callahan magic cannot be denied, and maybe he can sprinkle some on Andrus Peat and get him to play right tackle for the first time in his entire career. Maybe that's an option too, even though it's the least likely, in my opinion. But with that being said, we do got to talk about this Marvin Harrison Jr. thing because the buzz around Malik Nabers got really, really loud on Monday. So we'll talk about that next. Before we get into it, do want to let you guys know that today's episode is brought to you by Robinhood. Did you know that even if you have a 401k for retirement, you can still have an IRA? Robinhood has the only IRA that gives you a 3% boost on every dollar you contribute when you subscribe to Robinhood Gold. But get this, now through April 30th, Robinhood is boosting every single dollar you transfer in from other retirement accounts with a 3% match. That's right, no cap on the 3% match. Robinhood Gold gets you the most for your retirement thanks to their IRA with a 3% match. This offer is good through April 30th. Get started at robinhood.com/boost. Subscription fees apply. And now for some legal info. Claim as of Q1 2024 validated by Radius Global Market Research. Investing involves risk, including loss. Limitations apply to IRAs and 401ks. 3% match requires Robinhood Gold from 1 year of the first date of the 3% match. Must keep Robinhood IRA for 5 years. 3% match on transfers is subject to specific terms and conditions. Robinhood IRA available to U.S. customers in good standing. Robinhood LLC, member SIPC, is a registered broker-dealer. Titans fans, let's continue and cap off today's edition of the Locked On Titans podcast. We talked about the Titans free agent visits, one with Chase Young that didn't happen, one with Andrus Peat on Monday, one that's expected to happen with Marcus May at safety. The Titans need to focus on Joe Alt insurance at offensive tackle, but the path to Joe Alt got even clearer over the weekend. We went over why that was with each team ahead of the Titans. But now we got to talk about this crazy Malik Nabers buzz and the Marvin Harrison Jr. at pick number 7 conversation. Before we get into it, thank you again for making Locked On Titans your first to listen each and every day, Monday through Friday, Tennessee Titans content all year round, always for free. Make sure you get subscribed, stay subscribed. It's your team every day. But there was, again, Malik Nabers conversation run rampant on Monday from 2 very good draft analysts. And I'm going to throw 2 tweets up on the screen, but don't worry, podcast folks. I'm reading them out to you. Don't worry. But Daniel Jeremiah at Move the Sticks on Twitter, obviously one of the best draft entertainment analysts in the NFL or in the world, really, said, Daniel Jeremiah says on Twitter, I wouldn't be shocked if Nabers, Malik Nabers, wide receiver LSU, ended up being the first wide receiver off the board. I love Marvin Harrison Jr. and Rome Odunze, but Nabers brings a different element. It'll come down to preference of style, but I guarantee some teams will have Nabers at the top of the list. Dane Brugler, who is my favorite draft analyst, retweeted that and said, 100% true. Nabers has been viewed as wide receiver 1 for several teams since the season. And that says more about Nabers than anything else. He's a special talent. Okay. I get it. And I, as Tyler Rowland, host of the Locked On Titans podcast, I am not in a position to tell Dane Brugler and Daniel Jeremiah that they are wrong about their assessment of where Malik Nabers is ranked. All right? There's no way that I'm going to do that. But here's what I do know. That every year, as we get close to the draft, certain things get misconstrued. Like last year, CJ Stroud was my number 1 quarterback the whole time. He's QB1. He's the best thrower of the football of any of these guys. And then the S2 score comes out and people start wondering about the S2 score and all of that. And next thing you know, CJ Stroud goes number 2. Okay? So I'm just saying that there are always examples of people get bored. There becomes fatigue. We've talked about how awesome Marvin Harrison Jr. is and how elite he is for 2 straight seasons. Now we get closer to the draft, and it's just not as exciting to talk about Marvin Harrison Jr. anymore. So we start talking about Malik Nabers more. Malik Nabers is awesome. I want Malik Nabers on the Titans. I would love if the Titans came home with Malik Nabers. If they get one of Marvin Harrison Jr., Joe Alt, Malik Nabers, and Rome Odunze, I'm gonna be happy. All right, no matter what. So it's not hate on Malik Nabers, but I'm just saying, I think Marvin Harrison Jr. is generational talent. I think there's no way in the world that Marvin Harrison Jr. falls to the Titans at 7. So let me humor it. People say I'm wishy-washy because of stuff like this, but I'm just humoring the other side of the argument here. Caleb Williams goes number 1 to Chicago. Drake May to Washington. Jaden Daniels to New England. Let's say Arizona takes Malik Nabers because they like Nabers more. The Chargers still take Joe Alt. They want to run the football, and this is where the whole thing hinges on, is the Chargers. There's no way that the Chargers would take Joe Alt instead of Marvin Harrison Jr. Like, there's just no way. But everybody is reporting that the Chargers want to run the football, and Greg Roman is the OC, and they don't care about wide receiver. They want to establish dominance on the offensive line. Trey Pipkins isn't good enough. Blah, blah, blah. They're taking Alt. Okay. All right. So let's say they do. Minnesota comes down, takes J.J. McCarthy. Because if the Giants stay there, they're taking Marvin Harrison Jr. There's no way. So let's say Minnesota trades up to 6. I mean, again, this is how unrealistic of a scenario it would be for Marvin Harrison Jr. to then be there at number 7 for the Titans. 4 quarterbacks, and let's do it a different way. 4 quarterbacks go in the top 4. The Chargers take Alt, and then the Giants take Nabers. Titans take Marvin Harrison Jr. I guess you can hold on to that hope if you want, but I just refuse to believe that that's possible, that a player of Marvin Harrison Jr.'s caliber could drop that far. I have a hard time thinking that, because let me just say this, if Marvin Harrison Jr. is on the board, like, I don't care who else is there. Marvin Harrison Jr. is my number 1 player in the draft, period, no question. It's Marvin Harrison Jr. number 1, Joe Alt number 2. And I'm all over the Joe Alt pick. I'm the leader of the Alt cult, because I don't think there's any way that Marvin Harrison Jr. will get to number 7. I'm not even entertaining that as a possibility. So it's pretty simple to me. If Marvin Harrison Jr. is available at pick number 7, you run. And even though the Titans just signed Calvin Ridley, there's no way that I'm taking somebody else over Marvin Harrison Jr. anyway, because 1, both the Titans wide receivers are going to be 30, in their 30s. Marvin Harrison Jr. is a true X wide receiver. Line him up on the line of scrimmage, isolated by himself for a decade, and let him dominate. Then you got Calvin Ridley, who's in the Z role, who can move around and be the movement receiver. And then you let Hopkins be your big physical slot wide receiver in the Tyler Boyd role that they had in Cincinnati. He would be an even better version. That would be insane. And then you still have pick number 38. You combine that with like pick 107, move up, get J.C. Latham, Armarius Mims. I'm just saying, you could get real crazy there. You could get real crazy. Even if you don't do that, having Marvin Harrison Jr. at 7, make no mistake about it. Just because the Titans signed Calvin Ridley doesn't mean that they should not go get Marvin Harrison Jr. if he's at 7. But again, I think it's illogical. I think you're pretending if you think that he's actually going to drop to 7. If you're telling me that the Titans maybe move up to 5, then sure, whatever. I don't think that would be a smart move to jump up to 5 for anything other than quarterback, which they're not doing. So don't trade up. But man, I guess you could argue it's more possible now with the quarterback news and all of that, but no way. Again, the more realistic path is most certainly Joe Alt. Hard to envision Marvin Harrison Jr. dropping that far with the Cardinals and the Chargers and the Giants ahead. It's just implausible to me, even if, the Malik Nabers buzz is hot and heavy right now. But with that being said, and again, Malik Nabers buzz only helps the Titans' path to Joe Alt even more. So again, that goes back to what I think is more realistic there, of course. And that's Joe Alt, which I cannot wait for and I certainly hope for. But with that being said, that is going to do it for today's edition of the Locked On Titans podcast. Hopefully we have some more free agent news tomorrow. Talk about a potential Traylon Burks trade. As always, I am your host, Tyler Rowland, and this was Locked On Titans.